What you are about to hear is a special release of our members-only episode, Monster Men of the Reservation and Otherworldly Odors. Sign up at beliefhole.com to become an expansion member for more deep dives into the strange. Now, sit back and enjoy the episode, and we'll see you next time for our regularly scheduled release. Well, hello. Welcome, Belieflings, into the expansion. Are you ready? Want to go for a ride? In an alien craft, perhaps? A strange, stinky, reptilian flying room?
Scaly, gross, nasty.
Got any cheese?
It's funny you say that, John. That's going to come
I
in.
know, I read stories.
Oh, you do? Oh, that's right.
Timely, was it Oracle? What was his name?
Urkel?
Oracle.
It's a sci-fi version.
A timely Urkel reference.
Yes, this is going to be a really interesting episode, I hope, for you guys. I find it very fascinating.
Oh, it is. It is definitely an interesting, fascinating topic.
Starting off, wanting to do kind of a revisit of Ardy Sixkiller Clarke's book. She is an author, Native American, or part Native American.
Dr. Ardy Sixkiller Clarke, a professor emeritus at Montana State University, is of Cherokee and Choctaw descent and is known for her work as an author, educator, and researcher focusing on Native American culture and stories, particularly those related to encounters with the paranormal and extraterrestrial phenomena.
She wrote a book called Space Age Indians, Their Encounters with the Blue Men, Reptilians, and Other Star People. We covered that book a little bit on a previous episode.
That's right.
Fascinating encounters. She goes in and she actually tapes these recordings. I was wondering when I was reading them, how does she remember the detail of each conversation?
Yeah.
And then I was like, duh, she goes in with a tape recorder.
Like, Mama got up and grabbed the tea kettle.
Right.
And I asked her, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's all it's interesting. The book itself is very narrative. You really feel like you're in the room while she's interviewing these people about their incredible, terrifying, strange stories of entities, aliens, if you will, on the reservation.
Yeah, and for our purposes, I took out a lot of her questions to the interviewee just for the flow of the story. But we'll have the book link. Definitely check it out. But when I was looking into her stuff, one of the stories, which you'll hear, gave me an idea. When she started describing the smell of the close encounter.
I like how you said that. The smell. Tim Curry stuff.
But I was like, that sounds familiar. I feel like I've read that somewhere, like that specific, the smell of these things. Of course, we talk about the smell of sulfur in certain close encounters with different sorts of beings. Anyway, I pulled out Preston Dennett's book, Not From Here, Volume 2, and Chapter 7 is called The Smell of UFOs. So this first account is what led me down this road. Fascinating account. This is a woman named Rain who lives on the reservation. 33-year-old mother, homemaker, lives with her husband Russell. She never believed in UFOs or flying saucers or anything like that, but she had her own personal encounter which rocked her world.
So did she approach Ardy Sixkiller about this? How did Ardy become familiar with the account? Or was she on the reservation just kind of collecting these stories and asking around?
Yeah, I'm not sure how she knew her. She usually knows somebody through somebody. She knows a lot of people on these reservations around the country. For example, the Mama story we're going to do later, she knew the grandmother in that story.
Right.
Yeah, this one is fascinating, and it's high adventure. This is called The Blue Men in a Speeding Train. My encounter happened in the fall of last year. I went to the city to shop for school clothes and supplies for my kids. My mother-in-law told me she would babysit, so I left the kids at home. Russell, my husband, was working that day, so I went alone. I had a great day shopping. I met a college friend for lunch and finished my shopping by 6 and headed home. I had a 2 or 3 hour drive ahead of me. I expected to arrive home by 8 p.m., and Russell promised to feed the kids and put them to bed. It was on the way home, on an isolated section of the road near the railroad crossing in Burgess, where I had my encounter. You know how quiet and remote that place is. The whole town is no more than a city block, but it was particularly dark when I came through town. Generally, I see lights in windows and a lighted beer sign at the bar, something to show there was life. On this night, it was very dark. No lights, no people, not even a light in a house. It gave me an eerie feeling. I remember the hair standing up on my arms like static electricity. I slowed at the railroad crossing. looked both ways to make sure there was no train, and pulled onto the tracks. Suddenly, I hear a thunderous sound, and my Suburban began rocking. I looked up, and a train was speeding down the rails with no lights. It was headed directly for me. There was no warning that a train was approaching the crossing, no barriers across the road. I stopped on the accelerator. There was no way I was going to make it. Then, out of nowhere, I felt my car levitating. It was lifting off the ground. I opened the car door, but there was nothing below me but darkness. But I swear, my car was moving upward, and there was no place for me to go. After that, I must have passed out. I woke up in an unfamiliar place. There was nothing like it I'd ever seen in my life. It wasn't long until I discovered I was on a spaceship. I found myself in a hot, humid, barely lit room. It was moist and smelled like rotting trees. My car was missing, and I kept thinking that I still had 2 years to pay it off. I worried about how I would get home. It wasn't long until these strange entities, 5 of them, entered the room. They were blue. I know that sounds incredible, but they were huge beings, human-like in appearance, but glowing, luminescent blue. They spoke to me in English in my head. I heard voices in my brain. They said they had been observing the Earth, and they were watching when I was approaching the train crossing. They realized the train was going to collide with my vehicle, and they decided to save me. I don't know why they chose to save me, and I was too hysterical to ask. I just wanted to be home. I knew they saved me, but I just wanted to get away from them. I'm not sure if anything else happened while I was aboard. I tried to stay awake, but I couldn't. The next thing I remember, I was sitting in my car on the other side of the crossing, and my car was running. It was almost midnight when I pulled into the garage. Russell opened the door and yelled at me, demanding to know where I'd been. I told him the car quit working, and I was stranded on the side of the road until someone came along and restarted my battery. I was almost 4 hours late.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
I wonder why they saved her.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, what are they thinking?
It's interesting that they took her up into the craft. Is that you think if it was just to save her, they could have been like, bloop, just move her out of the way, take your tractor beam and give a little swing.
Yeah.
But they brought her up.
Well, maybe they felt like they were at fault. Because when I was first reading the story and before I knew what was going to happen in it, if you notice, she gets into this town and it's weirdly quiet. All the lights are off, almost like the power is out. Even the train's lights are off. The train crossing isn't working. So maybe they unintentionally
they broke the train crossing, so they're like,
caused
whoops.
it. So they're like, oh, we got to save her. But yeah, good point though, why take her up? Maybe they just wanted to have her experience the inside of their stinky house.
It's important to note too, like I feel like we often talk about the others or these entities. And sometimes I forget, I think just in the course of doing the show, that it obviously makes sense that would be potentially all kinds of different species of entities from other places, wherever, the dimensional.
Inner, outer, upper.
And the idea that
They all have the same agenda.
Yeah. Like there could be some that are just passing through or like they're neutral or benevolent. Some are malevolent.
There's so many really weird accounts out there that seem very believable to me. There's a smorgasbord of
Points to a spectrum of types of potential entities.
Yeah. So she lied to her husband when he asked her, why didn't you come home? So Ardy's like, why'd you lie? She basically says, because I don't think he'd believe me.
Yeah. I'm sure she's still processing it. Did she even believe it?
I guess it had been years, I think, at this point.
Oh.
And she still hasn't told him about it. But it is cool. Ardy keeps in touch with these people. So she still talks to her from time to time and says she hasn't seen him again since that experience. But I guess she asked Ardy, like, have you heard of these blue men figures? And these are pretty common on different reservations, this specific being for some reason, this race. So, but Rain said knowing that has really helped her, I guess, overcome this, and her nightmares have kind of stopped.
She wasn't the only one.
Yeah.
Other than the blue skin, was there more of a description like about the eyes or the other features?
In this account, it was just that they were very tall, kind of glowing in blue. Yeah. I think that's all that was in this reporting of it.
Yeah.
Well, these ones seem fairly benevolent.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind these ones. Now, the reptilian
Yeah.
Big-bodied,
The monster
buffalo-headed
men.
The monster men.
that eat deer alive. Those are the ones that you want to avoid, I would think.
Yeah. But the blue skin is, I find interesting because there are so many stories. I've been coming across more and more of blue-skinned entities that specifically do abduct,
Yeah.
but aren't necessarily malevolent. There's a bunch in Albert Rosales' work, just scanning through the humanoids books
Oh, yeah.
of these blue skin. There's always these patterns. So, yeah.
But there's that smell, which is going to take us down the road.
There's that smell.
There's, ooh, that smell.
Ooh, that smell.
And actually, if you remember from the last episode we did with the reservations, my favorite story where the reservation officers were investigating a break-in and
Oh, yeah.
ran into those 3 giant reptilian beings that were like
Yeah, that's
in this person's house for some reason. And then they get abducted, I believe. But here's a quick quote just from that encounter in relationship to the smell. This monster was carrying me up some sort of ramp. He carried me inside a structure and locked me in a room. I was alone in a dimly lit place no bigger than a bathroom. I searched for an exit, but the walls were strange like sponge, porous, and wet with no evidence of a door. This is familiar, right?
I remember this story.
There was no escape. I no longer had my gun. I don't know what happened to it. I had nothing to defend myself. And then she asks him, was there anything else about that room that you remembered? He says, just a dim light filtering down. I ran my hands along the walls. They were warm and, quote, smelled like swamp water. When I banged on the walls, it left imprints, but they quickly disappeared.
I remember that.
Yeah, so again, the smell, and we'll hear more like swampy descriptions. So there's some sort of...
And were these the lizard?
Yeah, those are the lizard ones. That was a really awesome story, actually. Maybe I'll just drop that at the end of the episode. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, those are the lizard ones.
Okay.
So that's going to relate to our next story here, which I initially called They're the Devil's Children. But it is the Monster Men account, which is super fascinating.
Monster Men.
So to set up this story real quick, the protagonist in this account, his name's Buck. His legal name was Horatio, but he got nicknamed by a Catholic nun, South Dakota.
Now he's on a reservation?
Yeah, he worked for legal aid, actually, for an advocacy group representing American Indians in federal prison. So he would work with the prisoners and the lawyers to get ready for appeals, get the paperwork ready and everything like that. And Ardy happened to know his grandmother, who he was living with when he was growing up. And he said he kept his encounters private due to the nature of his work. Obviously, it's kind of a serious job. And, he was worried that these accounts, his close encounter accounts, would discredit his work.
Right. This so often does.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is his story. And they're at Myrtle's house. This is his grandmother.
That he refers to as Mama.
Mama, yes. And it is Ardy's friend, the grandmother. This is called Monster Men.
When I was about 9 years old, I was staying with Mama. I did that a lot. She was my rock. At night, I began seeing these monster men who often roamed around Mama's house at night. I was a night owl boy, had a hard time sleeping, and the summers were so hot, and in the evenings, it was hard to sleep. We had one fan in the house, and it was reserved for the living room. At night, I would go there, relax on the couch, and quietly turn on the fan. Mama didn't allow me to use the fan much. She said it ran up her electric bill, and in those days, even being a teacher didn't pay much. The tribe set the salaries, and teachers were at the low end of the totem pole. I saw the monster men for the first time when I was a boy, but every encounter has been with the ones I call the monster men. They are the same. Always before I saw them, I would see a bright light that lit up the night sky and the earth below. It gave the appearance of a bank of bright lights, all pointed at the windows of the house. After the monster men came, I would watch them as they walked around at night. I would see their shadows as they passed the windows. I was afraid. It took at least several weeks before I got the courage to go outside and check them out. At first, I hid in the shadows, and what I observed were really monsters. They were taller than any man I had ever seen. They walked funny, like when they set their foot down, it came down with a thud. They seemed strange to me, like someone learning to walk for the first time. They walked a lot like toddlers who were unsure of their balance. but they were huge beings walking like that. To a 9-year-old, this was confusing, but at the same time, I was fascinated. I wanted to know where these monsters came from. I wondered if they were demons from hell that the father talked about in church. One night, I heard a frightful sound coming from the barn. I knew something was scaring my mare, Betty. I heard her kicking her stall and neighing loudly. I rushed out the door, only to come within a foot of one of the monsters. He reached down and caught me in one hand and held me aloft like a rag doll. He sniffed me. He actually sniffed me like an animal might do when they are unsure of something. Then he dropped me from his grasp and walked toward another monster who was about 20 feet away. I jumped to my feet and headed for the barn. When I entered the barn, I picked up my BB gun that I always kept by the door. I didn't expect it would stop the monsters, but I could at least put one's eye out. I was a good shot. That's how I got the name Buck. I could always be counted on to bag the biggest buck when deer hunting. I didn't see any of the monsters in the barn, but I smelled them. They had a terrible stench about them like rotten eggs. They were there and gone, I guess. I tried to calm Betty, but nothing could comfort her. I finally gave up.
That is terrifying. Incredible story.
Yeah. Super creepy. Even the beginning of that line where he just says, I would watch them as they walked around at night. I would see their shadows as they passed the windows. Just like a ominous.
It's amazing, like movie scene.
Yeah.
From like a child's perspective. It just reminds me of The Gate. There was like a Gate 3. Yeah, these things came out, these giant potty walkers with their kind of stumbling around. Remember when they showed like the old gods in that movie and they come up at the end, they look kind of like, almost like a lizard-like dinosaur things. That's just what I picture.
The many arms.
I just wonder why they're so uncoordinated.
Maybe this isn't their natural. Well,
yeah, I mean, that's
from here.
Maybe even the vessels are not their natural.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe they're some sort of parasite.
Maybe they're just skin suits.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like Crane the Brain.
Did he ever say he saw the craft other than that light?
Yeah, in the next one he does.
Oh, that's right. This is a two-parter.
Yeah.
Yeah, very terrifying. Let's hear the conclusion of this man's, at least this encounter. He's had, I guess, several encounters over the years with these things.
I mean, that's so crazy. It's so hard to believe because you're picked up by your neck by one of these things and you get sniffed.
Yeah.
I mean, if that really happens, the trauma that would come with something like that,
Yeah, it does make you wonder if this is all a true account and these things really did come in some sort of technological craft, but they seem very, very organic, very like animalistic.
Yeah.
It's like
primal.
You wouldn't put it together with piloting what we think as a technology.
That's the weird part.
Yeah.
It doesn't really go together with like high tech.
Yeah. That's what I'm wondering if, is this craft true technology?
Although when we get into the accounts of Strieber, I feel like, I mean, the fact that, I don't want to give too much away, but the fact that the place he was in was like dirty and stinky.
Yeah.
That doesn't really scream high tech either.
It's very interdimensional sounding. And we'll get to later on a little bit more of Jacques Vallées' concept.
Lazy, technical beings. Clean your room.
We're going to talk about later, we'll tie into this, but it's called the diffusion theory. But it relates to the idea that we've talked about before that like how much of this is, an overarching sort of paranormal force that's
wearing masks.
Yeah, and changing based on the millennia, based on what the zeitgeist is. The face stuff too. But yeah, let's hear the second part of this experience. Now, in this point in the interview, this is where Ardy asks him, what do these things look like that grabbed you? And this is where we pick up the story.
At the time, I couldn't see much. It was dark, but 2 weeks later, they returned. This time, I was ready. I had my 12 gauge, a box of shells, and my flashlight. After the first encounter, I was ready. I was so naive. It was along about midnight. At the first sign of the first lights, I went outside and climbed into the loft of the barn. It wasn't long until I saw this tank-like craft descend from the sky and land. I saw 4 beings emerge from the craft and walk toward the small creek that flowed on the west side of the property. A few minutes passed and they began walking the property, making what appeared to be a circle around the place. It was like they were searching for something. They reminded me in some ways of a huge snake, at least their heads did. Their body was more human, with arms and legs. They seemed to be able to communicate with one another, but I could not understand them. They made hissing and grunting sounds. It was nothing I understood, but it looked like they understood each other. Their heads were huge, the size of a buffalo head, but there was no neck, just a head that grew out of their body. When one of them came close to the barn, I shined a flashlight in his face, and he had the weirdest eyes. Big slanted eyes that reflected red in the light like a wild animal. His mouth was like a big snout, nothing like a human. When he opened his mouth in response to the light, I realized he could eat me with one bite. The light in his face caused him to back away, and I fired a shot. Not directly at him, but close enough that he knew I meant business. To this day, I remember the sound of the shot, the kick of the 12 gauge, and what I interpreted as fear in the reaction of the monster man. At once, he headed toward the others who had assembled together in a circle. For a moment, they stood there. Then they walked back to their spacecraft and disappeared. I watched them leave. I stayed in the loft until they were no more than a star in the sky.
I mean,
That's insane.
yeah. These accounts are definitely on the fringe of the UFO reservation.
Yeah. I mean, it's so cinematic. It is hard to fully suspend disbelief just because of approaching something like that.
Yeah.
His head the size of a buffalo could eat me.
How old was he again?
9?
What?
And this is Buck, right?
Yeah.
And he was killing the biggest deer at 9?
According to him.
Well,
Sounds
not
weird.
with bare hands.
He's very
obviously,
good.
He said he was like the really good shot.
Really good shot, yeah. I mean, some kids start hunting really early.
That's
It
true.
can be really good. I think the weird thing is more shooting. Yeah, I guess you're 9 years old. There's a different kind of fear. I feel like almost there might be more terror and trauma as an adult seeing something like that than as a kid.
It's possible that because your imagination is still so open.
Yeah, you still believe in Santa Claus. You could also believe in buffalo-headed snake entities.
Also can't grasp the concept of death really at that point yet.
Or
either.
something that shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
As much as adults are so ingrained in what should exist that would break you, I think, as an adult. Versus a kid might be more like when a kid falls, he bounces, Same thing mentally.
Yeah.
With their beliefs.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
That's science.
It is interesting because if true, obviously there's some like dark aspects to these things, right? And what did he say they smelled like? Stench about them like rotten eggs.
Yeah, sulfur.
Sounds demonic.
Does a little bit, yeah. I mean, that's pretty common. It's interesting the overlap with that in some close encounters with alleged extraterrestrials and also, with dogmen.
Yeah.
Or some of the creepier Bigfoot experiences.
Mm.
So there's the smell for you.
But apparently this kid, Buck, had multiple accounts beyond this. With
Right.
these things on his property and is concerned about his grandma. Was it his grandma, Mama?
Yeah.
The concern because she won't leave the house. So as of the time of Ardy writing this, that was a concern of his that she's not going anywhere.
Oh,
These
right.
things are still around.
Yeah, I'd be worried about my grandma.
The question of like, what are they doing there? What do they want?
Yeah.
He wasn't sure if they had anything.
Said they looked like they were looking for something.
Well, he said apparently they could plant thoughts in his head. The communication that he had with them wasn't like a real back and forth, nice
Right.
cup of tea conversation, but ideas, visual images and things would be planted in his head. Essentially, he didn't think that they were there to do him harm. Although they could eat him.
Obviously, they didn't. Or
Right.
They would have.
Exactly. He was kind of like, seemed almost like a nuisance.
Yeah.
Right.
They're actually concerned, according to him, the impression he got was that they were afraid if they were discovered that humans would destroy them, which seems strange because not only are they very technologically advanced, but they are obviously extremely powerful.
Yeah.
They're just not very coordinated.
Yeah. I guess that's true.
I feel like these are like the Reptilians, but they're also not.
Yeah.
They're like maybe a version of them, but they're not the kind of, because I've heard, I feel like Reptilians have been really strong and fast and
Agile.
yeah, these are like
They're like
the bumbly cousins,
I was gonna say the same thing.
but still terrifying looking.
Yeah.
What's Jeremy's character in the skits we used to do with
Gary?
Oh, yeah, Gary.
That was Gary.
Yeah.
You were Plimbo and Splepsplar.
Your reptilian character are these guys, more like these guys. We're kind of flopping around and
Why am I that?
Jeremy the unfortunate alien.
Why am I that? Why am I that guy?
that's who your character
Flop?
was. Yeah.
Oh, you mean my character, not
Yeah.
my personal self.
No. You as Gary.
You're
I don't
very,
flop
very
around.
coordinated. You'd never drop or break anything.
I mean, I drop things in this like a skillful way. Like it's elegant to watch me fall, but I don't
is a
flop around.
Great
Fall.
save.
Falls like a sparrow from the sky.
I'm very dexterous.
Yeah.
But yeah, to that point of what they look like, Buck would say that he would consider them, if they were of this planet, they'd be related to the lizard, essentially very lizard-like, but no scales, but the skin, translucent brown and green skin,
Yeah.
apparently.
But what were they looking for?
He thought maybe quartz.
Yeah. He said there were tons of geodes on his property.
Yeah, this actually
Grandmama's property.
This actually reminds me of The Gate a lot. Not only the description of the creatures and the kid kind of one-on-one against them with his rocket ship or his shotgun, but
The geode connection.
the geode connection was strange. As of writing this book, Ardy was still seeing Buck frequently and having long talks with him into the night about these, quote, monster men. And she says, quote, "There is no question in my mind that Buck is a reliable and honest observer of the reptilian creatures that have been reported by others. While his encounters do not seem to terrify the adult Buck, it is obvious that as a little 9-year-old boy, he was terrified of the monster men." And then when she asked him about the properties or anything specifically interesting, that why are they here? And he said, geodes, tons of geodes on and under the ground. Apparently, their land is the site of an ancient riverbed with a ton of geodes that he used to love cracking open and bringing home to his grandma. It just reminds me of that scene in The Gate
Yeah.
when he cracks open that geode. And that kind of starts the whole process, right, of the invasion from the hell dimension or the old world with the old gods. It just reminds me of that. Very strange.
Yeah. Interesting.
Have you guys seen large lizard, buffalo-sized headed creatures?
Didn't it say he saw one eating a deer that was like alive and it was eating it at one point?
Not in these stories.
Huh. Maybe it was on the outside of this story.
No, he said in the description of these things, he said, oh yeah, to your point, John, as far as what they look like a reptilian, but more like a dinosaur. It reminds him of pictures of dinosaurs that you would see, maybe a mix of dinosaurs and lizards. And he goes on to say, they are carnivorous. I've seen them capture and eat deer while the deer were still alive.
That's what I remembered.
Where was that?
On the reservation.
No, but that wasn't in the story.
It's just in the book, in between the stories.
Part of her interview with him.
Yeah. But that's terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, that is
that's
enough.
pretty intense.
Yeah.
It's weird why they're not violent to him.
Yeah.
Or people in
Maybe
general.
there's some karmic law of the universe.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe they respect humans as some sort of higher being.
Yeah, this is interesting too because he says, that he doesn't think that they're a threat, basically. But it's interesting what his mama says here. He says, Ardy asked him, why are you silent about this? Obviously, he's like, who would believe me?
Yeah.
Then Ardy suggests then that Myrtle has seen them too. That's mama. At which point Myrtle agrees and adds quietly,
"They're the devil's children. God didn't make those creatures."
So that's her take on them.
Yeah. Well, that connects to the sulfur.
Yeah.
And apparently what the priest was saying at church about demons and describing them, that's what he thought as a young boy kind of matched. And he wondered if they were demons.
Yeah, frightening.
But apparently they're not.
Well,
I mean, if they're
they
not.
have a spacecraft.
Yeah. Well, that and also just their demons, I would think would be a little more malevolent towards people and him.
And I don't think they eat deer.
That would be freaky though.
Yeah. I mean, unless they were just doing it to scare someone.
Yeah. Which would be
They
terrifying.
eat fear
Exactly.
and sadness.
And that both those things would populate in me if I saw a deer eaten alive. I'd be both sad and terrified.
You know what I long for, Jer, when I get sad and terrified? To be swaddled.
In your miracle-made sheets?
In my miracle-made sheets, yes. How did I know you were going to say that? Because you know how awesome these sheets are. This episode brought to you by Miracle Made Sheets.
I got problems at night sometimes. I heat up, people get warm.
so hot.
I get a lot of dreams that get me excited and get me going.
Weird.
And it's hard to stay cool, but these sheets, no matter your internal temperature, they have silver-infused fabrics.
Yes.
That help regulate that temperature to keep you cool all night long.
Yeah, if you don't want to be a stinky, smelly reptilian alien lizard, or smell like one at least, you might want to check out these sheets. They'll literally keep the bacteria out of your bed.
Yeah, that's right. And with that fairy-fighting silver property,
Very fighting.
they're also self-cleaning.
And the best part, in my opinion, is how they feel. They feel like a hug from eternity.
They do.
In a good way, not a scary, existential way.
No, comforting, come back home kind of sleepy feeling.
There's a weight to them that's just relaxing and holds you like a missing lover.
So upgrade your sleep today, guys.
Yeah, give them a try.
Go to trymiracle.com/beliefhole and use the code BELIEFHOLE, all one word, to
to claim your free 3-piece towel set. Heck yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/beliefhole to treat yourself. Link in the show notes, guys.
Yes, and thank you, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode.
So what's next, Chris? What were we saying?
Follow your nose to the next story, Chris. Is this all about smelly, stinky aliens?
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, this takes us into Preston's book. So we've been covering Ardy's incredible accounts on the reservation. Now we're getting into Preston Dennett's work, which we've covered him before, and his books, his series specifically, Not From Here, which are excellent. He's been researching for 50 years or some decades at least, because he doesn't look that old.
No.
I think I read that he's been doing it for 50 years.
He's a real special guy.
Might have started in high school, I don't know.
Very unique fella. Good researcher.
But I love his books because the way he categorizes and corroborates and correlates things, a lot like we like to do on the show, so it's great for that. And this book specifically is kind of like a compendium of encounters related to one another by different sorts of connections. And of course, we're focusing on, this episode will be the smells. The smell of UFOs, which is his chapter 7 in this. But if you remember, we did the UFO rescues at sea. We did a couple of those stories.
Oh, yeah. Those are from him.
Yeah, each of his chapters would make, wonderful deep dive episodes. But yes, now we get into the alien odors, as promised. What do these guys smell like?
Which guys?
That's the thing. There'll be differences depending on, who's encountering who.
Species.
Yeah. Preston brings up this point in his book. Nearly every aspect of UFOs has been intensely studied for more than 50 years. Propulsion, UFO crash retrievals, UFO landing trace cases. These are all things that ufologists have been looking into and doing a lot of reporting on. But largely ignored are the environments, craft interiors,
details.
The smells of the aliens themselves, obviously, gets ignored. And what follows, he says, may be the first full-length study of smells of UFOs and the largest collection of cases. This is interesting. So the recall of smells can corroborate a close encounter. If you think about how much it connects you to reality, it's what he talks about, like touch and smell are true like reality senses.
That's what Strieber said in his versus visual and audio, where you can have hallucinations in a sense.
Right.
Smelling olfactory, when you smell something that's real, that's specific. Same with touch.
Yeah, and how it connects to memory is so important for relaying a close encounter, because the part of your brain where memory works, your ability to remember and recall, it's the same area where the olfactory nerve, I'll just read this. Okay, in the brain, memory and the ability to detect odors occupy the same area.
That's right.
Yeah, the olfactory nerve leads directly to the core of the brain. So smells are inextricably connected to memory.
That's why, sentimentality and nostalgia when you smell the leaves burning in the fall.
Yeah. So Preston goes on to say, quote, in UFO accounts, reports of odors are rare, but they do turn up. And a study of these cases has revealed some remarkable patterns. What follows are 30 cases of involving alien odors. And of course, we're not going to do 30 today.
Right.
Definitely check out the book. But let's get into the first account. Now, this first account involves someone you guys may know, Whitley Strieber, widely known in the UFO circles. He's experienced a wider range of UFO encounters over the years and has had some pretty interesting theories on who and what these visitors, as he calls them, are. He's written several best-selling books, and on several occasions, he has actually smelled the aliens. So let's hear this first account with Whitley Strieber.
On December 26, 1985, Strieber was abducted from his New York State cabin and into a UFO. Once aboard, he was shocked to find that the inside of the UFO was dirty. I know this is no dream, he writes. I'm sitting on a bench in a little room and it smells funny. Smells something like cheese in here. Smells kind of nasty, to tell you the truth. It's not clean in here. The space I entered smelled like warm cheddar cheese with a hint of sulfur. Later on, during the same experience, the aliens told Strieber that they were going to perform an operation on him. He panicked and began screaming. The alien then asked him, "Can we help you stop screaming?" Strieber then used a strange but amazingly effective method to ground himself into reality. He said, "You could let me smell you." The alien then pressed her cheek up to Whitley's face, allowing him to smell her. Weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Her.
That's so strange.
Wonder how he knew the sex of the alien.
Maybe she looked like Scarlett Johansson in Under the Skin. Remember that creepy movie?
Oh, yeah.
Do you see that movie? Seen clips of it? She's just like a seductive alien, spoiler alert, that it's like an art film, very interestingly shot. And she basically like approaches men, kind of like lures them almost with like a walk. And then they appear on this ship.
It's like a black void.
It's basically a black goo lake of darkness. And all you see is her in this goo. And then the people slowly, they get naked with her in the dark. And then they start to dissolve and their flesh they just become eaten by her or the ship or whatever. It's very creepy.
Anyways, that didn't happen to Whitley. Thank goodness. But yeah, so he smelled an alien woman.
Yeah, good on him for thinking of that idea.
And it's a good way to ground yourself. I've done that before.
Yeah.
In panic attacks. Not to do an alien, but...
And it seemed like in that situation, they were interested in having a relationship with Whitley.
Yeah.
As a witness, as an abductee.
Yeah, his encounters are crazy, and there's so many back and forths with what he experienced, and very like almost metaphysical from what I remember. But yeah, so that was his experience then, that night. But Strieber doesn't just use the smell as a way to ground himself when it comes to these guys who are invading his home.
Oh, no?
No. It's also an indication, a warning that they're coming. As we'll hear in this account.
There is one earlier incident worth recounting, he writes. Because it was this incident more than any other that opened the door to the past, and it did this via my sense of smell. The night of Friday, February 7, we spent in our apartment in the city. I was absolutely frantic. I had an awful feeling. I felt their presence. It was palpable. Most upsetting, I could smell them. I could smell a distinct odor, as if of smoldering cardboard, and it was familiar from the past. My wife could also smell this odor. It was one we had both smelled many times. Until now, though, I had not understood its significance. There was also another odor, as if of cheese and cinnamon. For Strieber, the smell of aliens was extremely important, and was actually the impetus that led him to consider the reality of his experiences. As he says, I remembered the odors I had smelled the night before. Odor is an excellent trigger of memory, and the odor of smoldering cardboard seemed to unlock a lot of doors. I smelled it in 1972 or 1973. My wife and I had gone down to San Antonio to see my family, and we were sleeping in my sister's old bedroom. In the middle of the night, I suddenly awoke with the impression that I just heard a loud noise. I decided to get a glass of water. As I left our bedroom, I noticed a strange smell, like smoldering cardboard. As I went toward the bedroom to get my water, a small, dark figure with a red light in its hand burst out of my old bedroom and dashed downstairs.
Freaky.
Yeah.
There's little dark creatures I remember from some of his accounts.
Yeah. Well, was he the one that had like the little almost robed goblins that were similar to the near-death experience entities?
Yeah, those are some of the entities he encountered. And that sounds like it at the end of that one too. But bizarre. That's the frightening idea, the idea of you smelling something and then knowing that they're coming.
Yeah.
And there's no escape.
Well, even at a basic earthly level, do you hear those, any connection with Bigfoot and that kind of dead smell? Dogmen, like blood and decay.
Rot.
Yeah. Maybe all these things occupy the same kind of supernatural space in between. Or they just stink.
Or they have like rotting flesh on them.
Yeah.
From the kills.
Exactly. They don't bother flossing. I'm sure their teeth are gross.
Reminds me of that story with the guy driving down the road.
Oh, yeah, the clacking on the road, the nails.
Yeah, well, the guy that was terrified with the cherry bomb muffler.
Yeah.
I think I remember him saying like...
The smell.
And the mouth was like right there, and it was like rotting flesh and blood.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yikes. Well, luckily for Whitley, I think his smells here were like cardboard, rotten, like decaying cardboard and like...
Cinnamon and cheese.
Yeah.
What a weird combination.
Sounds kind of good.
Cinnamon and cheese.
Sounds like a weird, I don't know, some kind of like flavoring.
It reminds me of like if you let your kid make you like breakfast or something. Put cinnamon on your cheese, Dad.
Macaroni and cinnamon.
That sounds kind of good. Imagine like cheesy popcorn with a little cinnamon on it, a little sweet on that.
Mm-hmm.
Cheese.
Cheesy cinnamon. Maybe the aliens have come up with a flavor combination that we just aren't privy to.
That's actually a great
I'm
idea.
very disappointed that people really don't like it.
We should comb these smell stories for these kind of culinary combinations and see if they make sense to the palate. We should actually try them out, like cinnamon
Maybe
cheese.
the alien was just pregnant.
That's possible.
You know, pregnancy can sometimes they crave weird combinations.
That's what I hear. Yeah.
Like pickles and peanut butter.
Pickles and ice cream.
What do you guys crave out there? What are you guys going to get on this break? You guys going to get some cheese and cinnamon?
Try it. Let us know how it goes.
Yeah, seriously, let us know in the comments.
But no cheating if you try this at home. You can't have like the cinnamon sugar. It's got to be just the kind of bitter cinnamon.
That's a little harsh.
I don't know if it would even do anything because otherwise cinnamon doesn't really have a flavor.
Well, yeah. But that's what it is.
Well, I think he's probably referring to it smells like cinnamon he's used to, which is cinnamon with sugar.
Maybe.
He's probably not saying it smells like the bitter cinnamon root.
Well,
or
I don't
whatever it
think
is.
the smell changes the smell, does it? Maybe.
These are all important conversations you should consider at home.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, let's take a quick break. When we get back, we are going to get into some terrible stenches.
All right.
So I hope you're ready.
In the trenches with the stenches. See you in a minute.
Sorry to interrupt this killer track with an announcement, but we've got some pretty cool news. Yes, we do. Finally, the merch has arrived.
Yes! Awesome.
That's right. It's finally here, guys. We've been promising it forever, and it's finally up. As of this episode drop, as of you listening to our voices right now, you can now go to beliefhole.com/merch, or just go to beliefhole.com and click on the merch button. That's right. And you will find all these fancy new designs. And if you're watching on YouTube right now, you might be seeing them on your screen. Ooh. So come check them out. We got all kinds of fun mediums to display them, whether it be a warm cup of joe in a coffee mug or a swaddled long sleeve tee. To swaddle yourself. Pretty excited about it. We've got, inside references from the show. We've got a well, hello shirt.
That's
with
right.
Disembodied green, disembodied hand, which looks killer. Starve Your Ghoul shirt, finally. We had a lot of requests for that. And of course, a Dogman. Oh yeah, Dogman, and also Camp Creeply, finally. We've had a lot of requests for that, so check that one out. Might be my favorite. But yes, shirts, hoodies, drinkware, koozies, mouse pads, tons of stuff. So whatever you need, you can belief holify it.
Yes.
Help spread the hole. We really appreciate it. And we're super stoked for these designs. Oh yeah, and make sure that you read the descriptions. Trust me, it's worth it.
Absolutely.
You can find the link in the show notes to this. And big thank you to our wonderful friends,
Brad and Sam.
yes, generous with their time and their love of the whole.
Yeah, without them, this would not have got off the ground. So thank you guys if you're
Yes.
listening.
Much love to you guys and the kiddos, Abram and Leah.
Cheers, guys.
Yes.
All right, guys, check it out, beliefhole.com.
Get fancy.
Get swaggered.
Welcome back, guys. Hey, I hope your sniffers are ready. We're going to continue on down this path. This next story is a very interesting one, and I had not heard of this account, but it has been out there for a while. Let me know if you guys are familiar with it. It is an international case. This happened in Switzerland in the 1950s, and there's some controversy around it, which we'll get into after. A unique and controversial case occurred on the Swiss countryside on December 20th, 1958. Two young men, Hans Gustafson and Stig Rydberg, were driving along a remote road when they encountered a strange illuminated mist. Upon investigating, they saw a metallic disc. Suddenly, they were both grabbed by two, quote,
Blobs, like protozoa, just a bit darker than most, sort of a bluish color, hopping and jumping around the saucer like globs of animated jelly. The drag the things exerted was terrific, and they gave off such a terrible smell, like ether and burnt sausage.
Weird. The two men were able to escape from the sticky grasp of the gelatinous creatures and quickly fled the area. At first, they elected not to tell anybody. However, it was the odor that led them to seek a doctor,
We endured it for 3 days.
said Gustafson.
Then we decided that we should see a physician.
As the report reads, quote, that terrible stench seemed to stay with Hans and Stig. It seemed to have scarred their nostrils with its terrible odor.
It must have been bad.
Yeah, pretty bizarre account. Blobby.
These are all bizarre, Chris.
Yeah. This one's interesting.
Burnt sausage and ether.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that.
No. I'm not sure what ether smells
I
like.
don't either know.
Curious George knows.
What if that's like ozone? Maybe that's what he meant by ether.
Why?
Ether, ozone, it's all kind of atmospheric, and that's the smell you hear a lot in these accounts.
I think ether is referring to the chemical compound
that
Curious George overdosed on the t-shirts.
Oh, that's right. You're very
Not
right.
like ether as in like the ether around us.
I gotcha. You're probably right.
What does ether smell like?
While you're looking that up, I'll tell you about the controversy.
Sweet odor.
Oh, it's like a sweet odor?
Aromatic.
Sometimes described as a hospital odor. Huh.
So like a cleaning supply kind of smell? That's what I'd imagine.
Solvent.
Yes, solvents used in paint thinners, paint removers.
Mix that with burnt sausage and you get the smell of these blob people.
Yeah.
Weird.
Speaking of weird.
Yeah.
If you guys listening right now are like us, you're always jonesing for more weird stories. Absolutely. More deep dives into the bizarre. And one of my favorite places to get that, Chris, is the Y-Files. Very true. Great podcast, great YouTube channel, and they cover all the stuff that you guys are fascinated by, as are we. Conspiracies, aliens, time travel, even ancient civilizations. They dig deep. Yeah, and what I like about AJ's style, that's the host over there at the Y-Files, he really takes the time to look at every angle of the story, try to separate the fact from fiction. He's very thorough. Yes. He doesn't try to just tear apart a story. He doesn't make fun of the story. He takes them seriously, but not too seriously. Yeah, some shows I feel like are a little overly serious, maybe believe every detail, even if they don't quite add up. And then you got the shows out there that just tear it all apart. And where's the fun in that? That's why we recommend the Y-Files. So go check them out, guys. Link in the show notes. You will be pleased that you did. Available on Spotify or anywhere you get your podcasts. And tell them Belieful sent you. You know that famous phrase from the X-Files, the truth is out there. Mm-hmm. But we might suggest some of that truth you can find at the Y-Files. Check it out. You won't regret it. Do it. It is funny. We'll get to this later, but the sausage thing, one of the highest tiers, I guess, of reports of smells are either Franks and beans.
Franks and beans or beans and onions. This sort of like kind of, I guess, musty kind of meaty, hearty comfort food smell?
Yeah. I don't know. But anyways, interesting. So this story, the story of these blobs, there is some controversy. Some people allege that it was a hoax because The Blob, the movie, was released September 1958. And this case, which made international news, was 3 months later in December of the same year. So some people say, well, they got the idea from this, yada, yada.
Right.
Other people argue it was a B movie at the time and wasn't very popular. And this happened in Switzerland. So it seemed unlikely that, maybe more coincidence. But the other theory, which I find more interesting, is the distortion theory. If it wasn't, in fact, blobby aliens. The distortion theory is basically what we were talking about earlier, the Jacques Vallée concept, where he kind of lays out this idea that the UFO phenomenon can be related to not so mythological creatures like elves and fairies, these things that are ever changing throughout generations, decades, centuries, to form whatever fits best in that area. And some of the similarities he points out are things that we would be familiar with. But it's interesting to kind of have them all next to each other to look at, consider. Fairy rings, right?
Yes.
Then later on, saucer nests.
Saucer nests?
Yes. Consider
I love that phrase.
I liked it too. The grass, laid down in circle, fairy rings, or even just a circle of dead grass or grass that isn't growing in the case of fairy rings. Anyway.
Some kind of Fortean circular hotspot.
Yes. High strangeness. Circles.
Crop circle.
Potentially. Is grass a crop?
To some.
He connects this by saying that the UFO phenomena is adapting its manifestations. It's adapting its external appearance.
Oh, so this is the trickster.
Right.
Like we mentioned, the masks, the facade. So this kind of goes along with Keel's concept of the
ultra-terrestrial.
The ultra-terrestrial, which is like the Fortean theory of everything.
Right. It's basically changing to match the zeitgeist of the current culture. But for what purpose? And this is what I think is interesting. But the idea of the distortion theory is that it's a control system that somehow, through this, you can control humanity, at least manipulate the culture.
Right.
Because the idea is that it's bizarre enough where it's going to make people wonder what's happening, but also bizarre enough that people high enough up don't want to look at it. So you're able to manipulate things at a lower level without really people looking into it, is the idea, this idea anyway.
It's the Bill Murray effect. No one will believe you.
That's right.
That's if you guys don't know that's the famous lore around Bill Murray where he'll get in an elevator, look at you, and then hit all the buttons for every floor, then step out on the next floor and turn around and say, no one will believe you.
Someone actually did a documentary on that, which was interesting because it turns out a lot of these stories are true.
Yeah.
We'll link that for fun.
But that's interesting. It just reminds me of this concept of kind of the wild card simulacra of reality.
Yeah.
It also points to the possibility or a mechanism of simulation theory.
Yeah, you could definitely look at it that way.
That all of these things could just be part of the game.
Just somebody putting in a thing to mess with
Yeah,
players.
maybe the builder of the game or the designer hiding himself. And like SimCity, you are the tornado
Yeah,
wrecking the roller coaster. Or maybe that's Roller Coaster Tycoon, but you know what I mean.
right. So in considering all of these things, when it comes to the distortion theory, even Dr. Hynek, the famous ufologist, considered one of the world's leading authorities on UFOs up until his death, the father of the scientific question of UFOs, even he questioned the extraterrestrial origin way back when, in the 1960s. And in UFO Report magazine in 1976, this is what he had to say.
I must say that the extraterrestrial theory is naive. We must consider the various factors that very clearly indicate a link or at least a parallel with episodes of paranormal nature.
That's interesting to me because I didn't know he was at all looking into that side of the reality to these things. The paranormal connection. Interesting stuff. But I think it's time to smell a little more.
Okay.
This next one comes from Dennett's book as well. We're going to go back to Strieber now. And it's 1998, a couple years have passed, and he's back in his infamous cabin, where a relative has a very close encounter with one of these visitors. This is called An Odor Like Wet Fur. In 1988, a visitor to Whitley Strieber's cabin had a fully conscious bedroom encounter with a gray-type alien. The lady, Raven Dana, was able to observe the being quite closely, including, at one point, touching the figure, and of course, smelling its odor. She was sleeping alone in a room in the cabin when the automatic motion detector lights came on outside and woke her up. She was startled to see a small gray alien standing at the foot of her bed, touching her leg. It stared at her for a few moments. It was then that Raven noticed its odor, which she described as, quote,
Kind of a musty odor, like the wet fur of an animal. Not unpleasant, but very woodsy.
A few moments after Raven's encounter, Lori Barnes was asleep in another room when she woke up to find apparently the same gray alien entering into her bedroom. She independently gave an identical description, including its body odor, which she described as, quote,
A musty odor. I would liken it to damp, woodsy.
Strieber says of this case, quote,
It is interesting that they both use such a specific description independently. This implies a very identifiable odor, and more importantly, a real one. Two people might well both imagine a scent, but not the same precise one, not after 6 years. I have been interested in their odors because I think of smell and touch as confirming senses, much more so than sight and sound. Over the years, I've tried to smell them and touch them as much as I could, and have noticed many different odors, the most notable of which is the human smell of them.
The human smell. I'm just picturing meeting Whitley Strieber and him being very touchy.
very sniffy,
and wanting to smell me.
and make around himself.
Could you imagine like holding onto your sleeve and just, can I?
Interesting, the stories up at his cabin. Very curious on both sides of the encounters. Like these different sorts of beings that visit there seem very curious.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's, of course, sniffing and...
Smell curious?
Yeah, interesting. Interesting place to stay, I'm sure.
What if he smells as many men aliens as he does the lady aliens?
Why would you if you didn't have to?
Good point.
But there we go. We have that connection back to even Ardy Sixkiller stories from the reservation. We have, the Strieber case, musty, damp, woodsy. And then the railroad rescue, that first story we did, swampy, smelled like rotting trees. This kind of like swampy, weird, like what's going on with that? I think it's kind of interesting.
So the most notable thing was the human smell of them.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you meant by that.
Well, maybe that it was a very inhuman experience. So why would they smell human? That's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it is interesting that Strieber got closer than any other contactee in this episode. He literally asked, "Can I smell you?"
Yeah.
And then he just
Somewhat rude.
got a good whiff.
But if they smell human, does that mean could they be in disguise?
I mean,
Could they be somehow...
who knows what it means?
Could they be connected to humanity? Could they be a withering future
A
human?
withering branch of humanity?
Yeah.
And maybe far flung into the future and now time travelers?
Or it could be the X-Files situation where, remember that episode where in the X-Files they were abducted and it turned out that it was a government project
Oh, yeah.
and they were using some sort of hallucinogen or something
That's always an option.
to cloak. I'm just saying that it is odd that they smelled very human. I mean,
Yeah.
you could take that all kinds of ways.
I will say that I don't think that's the case with Whitley Strieber's experiences, but it did cross my mind because he is in a cabin in the woods and the smell that comes through for his visitors, not the visitors from outer space
his
or
guests.
whatever. Yeah, the guests. It's a very woodsy smell. Are they like hunkered down in old pine needles, like waiting for people to fall asleep and then come into the
I
cabin?
don't think so.
No, but it's a very slim possibility.
No, I think you could also make the argument that the human smell, when he wanted to be grounded and so he wanted to touch, he wanted to smell, is there also the possibility that they projected that smell to make him more comfortable?
Of course, it's a possibility. Yeah.
Of course it is.
Also, the human smell is a musky smell.
Well, your smell is.
I mean, I deodorize.
You're a musky man.
I deodorize.
And musk is good.
No, but what I mean is that there is a certain, like the smell of a human, the smell of human skin. This sounds really weird saying this, but the smell of human skin, like let's say sweaty skin, for example,
Yeah.
has a certain human quality where you wouldn't smell the same thing when a dog gets sweaty.
Dogs don't sweat, they pant.
Okay, well, when they get stinky, I don't know, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like there is a certain quality to, if you ever given a hug to your father when you're 8 years old and you finish mowing the lawn?
Oh, yeah.
There's that smell.
Dad sweat?
Yeah, the dad sweat smell. That's a very human smell. If you would be surprised to smell that on a gray alien coming into your cabin at night.
Right.
Or in this case, some sort of female alien that might smell like your sweaty father.
But it'd be comforting.
Yes, it'd be very comforting. So I take your point. Maybe that's all an illusion for comfort.
But there are scarier smells, aren't there?
There are.
There are smells that are accompanied by attacks from the sky.
Yes, and this takes us to our next account, which we touched on in the Collectors Part 2.
Yeah, this is a
violent smell.
It's a violent smell. I mean, it's accompanied by violence.
It's also a violent smell. It scars the nostrils, I believe.
That's true. It's very intense. The smell of sulfur, a kind of sulfur, but the act of violence that comes along with it. This is a story coming up that takes place in Brazil, and this was a spate of accounts that I really wanted to cover in an entire episode on its own after discovering it from the book UFO Danger Zone by Bob, I forget his name, Bob something.
UFO Danger Zone by Bob Pratt.
The amount of attacks, the people that were being brutally assaulted, harassed,
Right.
laser shot by
Yeah.
these beam-wielding fire creatures from the sky, these chupas, they call them. This could be its own complete episode, but it does keep us in this concept of the smell, because the smell, oddly in this next story, despite the physical attack, sounds like it was the most affecting.
Right. And I had no idea Jacques Vallée went down to Brazil and interviewed these people. I was familiar with the story. Obviously, we covered on
The Collectors.
Collectors Part 1 or 2.
I forget.
But I don't know if I should say this because I don't remember if it was. If I remembered it was Jacques Vallée. No, you're right. It was. I did grab.
Yeah, because he wrote the foreword.
That's right. That was the synchronistic episode where I grabbed some stuff from Brazil with these violent chupa attacks. And the book I was referencing was a Jacques Vallée book. Was it Passport to Magnolia? I can't remember the book.
Yeah, I think it probably was.
But you were on Bob's work.
Yeah, of UFO Danger Zone, and Jacques Vallée had written the foreword to it. So they both had experience in Brazil with these chupas, which I haven't really heard anyone cover. I mean, it's been, I guess 40 some years.
I'm sure some people have, but yeah, I haven't come across it.
But it's a fascinating chapter of UFO strangeness and violence. And I just think it's fascinating that we never really hear about. I mean, we have the Tic Tac UFO. We have all these discussions now about UFOs and the interactions with whatever these entities or these crafts are, but you rarely hear about the fear and the violence.
Yeah.
And maybe because it's not happening as much, maybe there were different races of beings or entities or transdimensional forces, but
it definitely seems to be a regional thing too. Like the violent things have been happening in South America for decades.
It's hot down there. And I feel like,
to make a dumb joke.
No, but I mean,
when you get angry, you get irritable when you're warm.
Just like, when things get hot in the summer in the city, and there's more violence. I'm just saying, it's hot in the equator and people have shorter tempers and
so do UAPs.
So do UAPs, and they're ready to fire. So, Chris, set us up for this next tale.
It's not my theory. Yes, this next account is fascinating, and it may sound familiar if you listen to our Collectors Part 1 and 2. This is called
Like burning sulfur.
A large number of dramatic UFO accounts have come from Brazil. Some of these involve beams of light that cause what appears to be some sort of radiation sickness. Some of the witnesses died after being struck by beams of light from these objects, which they called chupas. In at least 2 of these cases, odors were reported. The first incident involved a hunter, as Jacques Vallée, the investigator of the case, writes, quote,
A theory among local people is that the chupas are attracted by the flashlights. They come over the hammocks and strike the victims with their concentrated beam. However, I found little consistency in the description of the beam itself. One witness compared it to an electric arc. On an interview tape, another witness said he remembered a, quote, bad smell like an electric odor, ozone, and saw a blinking light with pulsating colors inside.
Another incident occurred in 1982 to Manuel, a prospector and outdoorsman. He encountered a chupa while hunting. Jacques Vallée goes on.
Manuel shot and killed a deer early in the night. As he lay in his hammock, trying to get some sleep, 2 objects came over his position and fired a beam at him. He did not hesitate for a minute to take aim and fire at the lights. Seeing that this had no effect, he jumped down from the tree and started running. One of the objects stayed in hot pursuit, shining the beam in his direction as he staggered through the underbrush. Every time the light hit him, he felt weak and fell. He also smelled a foul odor. In the whole incident, which Manuel calls, quote, the worst thing in his life, it was the smell that affected him the most. It was penetrating, like burning sulfur, and it made his nose run. It did not impair his breathing, but it forced him to clear his throat at frequent intervals. He believes it was the smell, rather than the light, that made him fall, and that it was the piece of cloth over his nose that saved him.
Oh, so the smell was more intense than this laser light, this beam.
And there's sulfur smell again.
Mm-hmm. I think it would be a disturbing but fascinating episode to do on the UFO danger zone.
Oh, down in Brazil, South America?
Yeah, that we talked about on the Collectors episode.
Yeah.
The chupas, they seem almost organic, alive, these things just shooting lights, almost hunting.
In some cases, yeah.
Freaky stuff. But then again, there's that smell again.
Yeah.
And these are all different smells. It's not like this smell means these are all the same thing.
For sure. And Preston talks about this actually in his conclusion. He himself personally has reviewed several hundred cases at this point, and he got, for this chapter, whittled down to 30 involving types of odors. He goes on to say that more cases could be located, but it would become repetitive. It's kind of the same categories of smells. It is interesting when you look at these. The cases are numerous enough to reveal some startling patterns, he says. The odors can be broken down into 2 main categories, organic odors and electrical odors. At least 35% of the cases involve organic odors, described variously as cheesy, like cinnamon, like beans and onions, burned sugar, burned sausage, muggy, woodsy, like wet fur, alfalfa, and almonds, rotten organic matter, a locker room, bad garbage, and rotten eggs.
Bad Garbage is a great band name.
Bad Garbage.
There it is.
Album 1, Garbage Factory.
And this category is important for one reason, he says. The presence of organic odors strongly indicates that extraterrestrials, at least in these experiences, are biological. They're biological beings.
Not just machines.
Yes. So for several witnesses, smelling similar odors was the trigger that prompted recall of their UFO experiences. So smelling something in everyday life, then they had the recall. Or convinced them, if they didn't need to recall it, but remembered it, it convinced them of their authenticity in the experience, the smell, like the Whitley Strieber sniff test. The second category is electrical odors. A slightly smaller percentage of the cases involve reports similar to sulfur and ozone. This odor is a common side effect of electrical discharge.
Right.
The consistency of this odor, reported in a wide variety of independent cases, not only provides a strong case for corroborative evidence, but is important because it points towards the nature of UFO propulsion and the probability, not certainty, but probability that we are dealing with highly advanced technology. But again, there is that sort of like disconnect in a lot of these accounts.
So the idea that the a UFO would be either breaking atmosphere or creating some sort of vacuum or disturbing in a way that you would smell that ozone.
Yeah, it's having an effect with the atmosphere for
Right.
technological.
Which means it's physically there, not just a light.
Right, exactly. And this comes to the Franks and Beans question. While there are a wide variety of reported odors, the cases are remarkably consistent. In fact, one witness recently told me that she always knew when the aliens were around because she could smell, quote, beans and Franks, which always preceded their arrival. She had no idea that other witnesses were reporting the exact same odor. One said beans and onions, and the other burned sausages.
Weird.
This is interesting. This is a fun kind of episode.
It's a fun episode I made.
These are gross.
Although these odors are bizarre, the fact that they are repeatedly reported argues strongly for their veracity. The fact that you can corroborate these accounts by these very unique and maybe gross smells is interesting.
So you're saying you put enough of these accounts together, maybe you can identify maybe a particular species or entity with this particular
Right,
scent.
just like you
almonds might be the almond-eyed, blue-skinned people,
Right.
and then the
Sausage might be the flubby reptilians that you see in different accounts.
right, or the blobs.
And he concludes with this. Perhaps the most important conclusion to be drawn from UFO smells is that the UFO experience is taking place in physical reality. It's not being imagined in these situations. Odors are caused by molecular compounds hitting the olfactory nerve. In many of the cases, the odor is reported by multiple witnesses, again reinforcing that UFOs and their occupants are material in nature. They're not dreaming.
Right.
These aren't illusions. These are real and happening, basically.
Now, a skeptic could make the argument that people are just smelling something while asleep, right? In certain abduction cases, that would be
right.
an argument. But again, I guess depending on how much of the pattern you can align to specific reports and specific smells, then it gets hard to make the case that people are just dreaming while someone's cooking.
Right. And what if you're walking down the stairs and you have an experience or whatever, you're not
You're not asleep.
Yeah. Anyways, but yeah, this all reminds me of he does mention things like you can consider, we talked about earlier, the ET Bigfoot connection, similar smells, and also pets, another part of the reality. Pets will often alert to an encounter before it occurs.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Dogs can smell very well. So that's another possibility that maybe they're smelling what's coming.
So the idea that animals sense the paranormal when it comes to maybe biological entities that shouldn't be there, it's not because they are sensing the energy necessarily. It could be that they're actually smelling them.
Right. There's just another possible theory.
That's creepy to think about. Reminds me of Stardust Ranch.
Yeah.
Weird episode.
Yeah.
Very weird. I don't know how many times you said Frank and beans, but it was a lot.
And then it was written Beans and Franks.
I wonder if anyone gets hungry when they smell the aliens.
They're scared, but they're also kind of hungry.
They're
so
like,
who's
dinner.
They bring their crock pots. Franks
I'm
and beans.
hungry.
I am actually kind of hungry now. I was imagining eating boiled hot dogs when you were talking about that. It made me kind of hungry. All beef, round cylinders of greasy goodness.
Okay, it is interesting that Preston Dennnett at the end, I forgot about this part, but John just said strange episode. It's funny because Preston realizes that this is a very strange thing. He had by chance came across an account about the Beans and Franks thing. He had just talked to a witness who had said the exact same thing, kind of like a synchronicity. And so he says, this I thought was very strange and needs some looking into. And that's kind of what got him down this path. The sort of synchronistic and just I think a bizarre. He obviously loves the condensed sort of like, here's alien zoo stories, here's these witness encounters, and looking at the different patterns I think is always interesting.
UFOs that heal people, that kind of stuff.
I hope you guys found it interesting out there.
Me too.
I thought it was interesting, a little gross.
Mm-hmm. A little gross can be good,
a little gross.
A little gross can add a little pizzazz to your day.
Definitely a unique angle.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, not discussed about enough.
Not discussed about enough, pun.
Well, any final thoughts, guys, before we wrap it up?
Good job, Chris.
Hit that dusty trail.
Hold up, Chris. You promised you'd drop another story at the end of the episode. Do I really have to do everything myself? This is from another expansion episode, Unicorn Episode 5, Reptilians on the Reservation, Lizard People Among Us.
This is a fascinating story from Clinton. He's a fellow that actually runs a security company on the reservation. We don't know what reservation. I don't think it's listed in the book. It might be, but some details were kept anonymous just for obvious reasons.
Yeah, a lot of the experiencers were concerned about not only, whoever might be out there in another realm, but also worried about the U.S. government in a lot of cases hearing some of these reports and having their information out there, which is understandable.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Clinton's out there Most of his business comes from patrolling people's homes while they're on vacation or out of town. And some of these places are pretty out there in remote, desolate areas. At some point, the author is contacted by Clinton's cousin and says, "Hey, my cousin, I think he's willing to talk to you. He had an encounter with 3 monstrous aliens on one of his routine patrols." So Clinton agrees to meet with the author. They sit down and talk, and this is the story that comes out of it.
It was a sub-zero night in January when I got a call from Joe, one of my guys who works on the east side of the reservation. He said he was sick and unable to patrol several unoccupied houses on his rounds. I didn't have anyone to cover for Joe, so I decided, despite the distance of 50 miles, I would cover for him and get one of my in-town guys to cover for me. It was a long drive. The heater on my pickup was on the fritz, and my windshield kept fogging up with ice crystals. I had a bottle of antifreeze behind my seat, and I stopped periodically and poured the fluid across the glass. I remember it was below zero, and 20 miles into the drive, I'd wished I'd stayed in town. It was nearly 2 hours before I arrived. The snow-covered roads had turned to ice. When I arrived at the driveway of the first house on my round, my pickup suddenly lost power. It just quit. The lights went out, the radio stopped, and the engine died. The driveway was about a quarter mile long, so I checked my flashlight and started the long trek to the house. As I walked up the driveway, the house and barn set at the top of a small hill, I noticed a light toward the back of the house. It was a powerful light, shining a wide beam. I thought it was a burglar with a flashlight. Then I saw another light, and then another. There were 3 of them. Fortunately, I had my revolver. I pulled it out of my holster and decided to creep around the opposite side of the house to get the drop on them. Just as I was about to confront them, their flashlights turned toward me, blinding me. I knew they were advancing on me as the spotlights moved in my direction. I raised my gun and ordered them to stop.
Hold it right there!
I no sooner got it out of my mouth than I felt a hand on my neck. This wasn't a burglar. I'm a big guy. I am 6'4" and weigh 240 pounds. I work out and bench press 300 pounds. But whatever had a hold of my neck lifted me off the ground like I was a toy. I couldn't see who it was, and the more I struggled, the more my assailant squeezed my neck. I finally gave up. And once I relented, I saw the faces of the others. They were not human. I don't know what they were, but they were not human. They were communicating among themselves. I think that's what their grunts and whistles, almost like hisses, were. Then suddenly my assailant in the back picked me up, threw me over his shoulder, and walked toward the darkness. That's when I saw the ground shimmering with light. I couldn't tell where it came from, but I was surprised at the light. Then I became aware that this monster was carrying me up some sort of ramp. He carried me inside a structure and locked me in a room. I was alone in a dimly lit place no bigger than a bathroom. I searched for an exit, but the walls were strange. Like sponge, porous and wet with no evidence of a door. There was no escape. I no longer had my gun. I don't know what happened to it. I had nothing to defend myself.
So this is where Clinton finds himself in a dimly lit room, just a shaft of light coming down, the size of a closet. Interestingly, he said that the walls were warm and smelled like swamp water.
Yeah,
It was
spongy.
weird. And they were spongy, and when he tried to hit the walls, they would leave imprints. This weird kind of...
It was like Alien or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or Fire in the Sky. Reminds me of the Travis
very like
experience.
earthy kind of ship. Almost sounds like underground.
Very like natural beings.
Yeah, slimy organic.
Organic.
Like
Yeah.
living in the swamp in space.
Space swamp.
It's so weird.
Swamp spaceship. So eventually he feels this sensation of lifting off, becoming airborne. And then at that point he's okay, I'm in bad shape right now. And then in walk his captors, take him to this other room and sit him in front of what he calls a viewing center in the corner, where he watches Earth fade away into the darkness.
That'd be terrifying.
Yeah. And then he continues.
It was then that I realized that I was in far more trouble than I could have imagined. In front of me were huge, scaly figures with flat faces, big, wide mouths. They looked like lizards. They must have stood 8 feet tall. I felt like a dwarf next to them. They wore no clothes, although they had some kind of belt around their waist. They had flashlights, and what I assumed were weapons strapped to their arms. That's such a weird image thinking about that. And their arms were huge, twice the size of my leg, and they possessed tremendous strength. Their eyes were the scariest part of all. Huge oval-shaped eyes that wrapped partially around the sides of their heads. Their pupils were yellow and oval-shaped.
So, at this point, he's not expecting to ever see Earth again. But somehow, the next thing he remembers is lying naked outside his client's house where he was patrolling.
Right.
And remember, it's below 0 temperature, so he's like, I need to get to my car. Luckily, he left his keys in his truck. So he's able to start it, and somehow, on the way home, the heater starts. It's working, keeps him warm, so he's able to survive. And he gets to the Indian Health Hospital, and they examine him, and he's okay, but they ask him about his claw marks. And he tells them, I got tangled up in some briars while hunting.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I remember at this point the Sixkiller Clarke asked him, do you think he believed you?
yeah.
He said, I don't know, but they let me go.
Yeah, so the doctor looks at him strangely, puts some antiseptic on it. He got a few stitches. They gave him a pair of doctor's pants and sent him on his way.
Yeah, I guess he told the doctor that he lost his clothes in a poker game.
That's such a weird story to...
And what are you supposed to say?
Right,
You have
exactly.
to make up something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got abducted by reptilians.
Yeah, he probably didn't
and
want to have to make a report.
They took my clothes. Anyway, interesting account for
Yeah.
sure.
It seems like they could just kill someone if they wanted to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they must have some...
Other purpose?
Yeah, I guess there's maybe that they're supposed to do something, or they just have some shred of...
Compassion.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting too is these reptoids sound more like the Star People version, like not super violent. Like he did grab the guy by the neck, which is kind of rough.
But he had a gun. He was aiming at the others.
That's true. So this is kind of the creepy thought he has at the end. He said, when I got home, I fell into bed. I kept having all these nightmares about the creatures. I don't remember much. All I know is they did things to me, things I don't want to think about. We don't think that they'd have these kinds of brains or be able to fly around in spaceships, but these ones did. It makes me think...
Talking about lizards, right?
Yeah, the reptilians. So
No, but that's specifically, we don't think of lizards as
right.
having the ability to
Yeah.
Lizard-brained.
Right, or being able to fly spaceships.
Some lizards
Yeah.
do, but most don't.
Well,
It's a
these do.
generalization. So it makes a man think, what other kinds of creatures are landing on this planet? And what are they doing at a ranch house on an Indian reservation?
Yeah.
Looking for you.
Well, that's the thing is like no one... Thank you, John. No one was there. Did they think they were going to be interrupted? Probably not. So the goal was probably not to abduct this guy. It was just he happened to be there.
So
they
what were
grabbed
they
him.
doing?
How do you know, though, for sure?
No, I don't know for sure. I'm just saying it seems like he stumbled upon them, which you hear a lot in these reptilian situations. They're not...
It was a trap.
Like they knew his patrol round and that he was going to
They
come.
knew someone would come.
Possible.
That could have been.
We can't know the motivations of reptilians.
I'm going to say you could also, if you were going to be skeptical about this account, you could remember the part where his head is injured.
Mhm.
And then he comes to in the same spot where he injured his head. Could it have been some sort of fever dream from trauma?
His head was injured?
Well, I'm assuming they picked him up and threw him on the ground,
I
right?
don't think they threw him on the ground. They just picked him up by the neck.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought
They put him over his
His
shoulder.
shoulder.
I was picturing like a lizard body slam onto the ground.
That would be death. No, it's it was
Okay,
thrown over his
yeah.
shoulder like a continental soldier.
It's
His
so
ears
weird
hung
to
low.
think about like a 240-pound man just on a shoulder of a... And he's just like, no!
Mr. Reptile, please.
I mean, you think he wouldn't... I don't know. It depends how big these... How big did he say? Like 8 feet tall?
8 to 9 feet tall.
Mhm.
God, that'd be terrifying.
Yeah, and
if
he
it was
said, I
real.
mean, this lizard dude's arm was twice the size of his leg. And this guy works out. He says he bench presses like 300 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I thought you meant the lizard.
Well, he must work out.
Lizard bench presses. Okay, moving along.
All right, guys.
All right, guys.
We love you so much, and we
Yes.
thank you so much for being here and making the whole what it is. And it really is you that allows us to be here.
You are the forever whole.
You are the forever hole. That doesn't make any sense.
That's going to be a shirt.
The forever hole.
Forever hole.
All
All
right.
right, guys.
We've reached the end.
Yes.
There's nowhere to go.
But we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye. Bye.